Surprising no one that's been paying attention, Carmelo Anthony, the black kid who killed the white kid, Austin Metcalf, has been released thanks to a reduced bond, which went from 1 million to $250,000. And the judge that released him, surprise, surprise, is a black woman. And guess what? I looked up her political affiliation. Apparently, she's supposed to be a Republican black woman who she's only supposed to preside over the bond reduction hearing. I don't believe she'll be the trial judge, but nonetheless, this just goes to show you once again, no matter the proclaimed party affiliation, most Negroes are going to side with other Negroes, particularly when they're criminals, because the so-called culture has galvanized itself around supporting criminals. Now, when it's actual innocence, like the 5-year-old daughter of that rapper that got executed and murdered alongside her gangster rapper father, you know, when it's time to condemn that sort of activity, these Negroes are silent. But when it's time to defend a George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or some Negro that engages in criminal activity, then they all show up. And please believe the money that was raised that enabled him to make that bond, it wasn't just by a bunch of openly I hate white people, black people, but a lot of obliviously suicidal white people as well. Which then begs to ask the question, are these nitwits still oblivious to the fact that a race war is happening and it's heavily one sided and they're losing, while the victors still get to proclaim that they are victims themselves and losing? I mean, I saw something else that, again, made it pretty much publicly known they are out to get good old Whitey. There was a debate that took place in a town hall on CNN, and a black female representative said she regretted voting for the Laken Riley Act, which was a white woman killed by an illegal Hispanic, and she, comfortable in her position, said that she regret voting for that. And again, this is something, this Carmelo Anthony situation that took place in Texas, which is another example that doo-doos on this whole reputation that Texas have as being big bad and they don't play that. Please, there's constantly endless amounts of stories. I mean, Texas is still a crime-filled area, and they haven't gotten tough on punishing criminals in that state. As we know, they were one of the major hubs for illegals. And I recently saw a story where they've erected a giant sized Hindu statue to a monkey god in that state. Apparently there was a whole city full of illegals. Muslims are supposedly building their own little city within that state. So Texas' reputation is a myth. But of course, liberals, and particularly pro blacks, because I'm going to address them in this situation, they like to pump that up to sell this, mythological narrative that Texas don't play. And apparently, again, this judge that freed the man made it clear that she was all about diversity. And again, she got to call herself a Republican, which just goes to show you why I don't have a political affiliation. You would assume Republican, because obviously, especially if any liberal Negroes are listening to this, them being criticized, they think, oh, it's just Republicans. But again, I highlighted in a previous video, it was Republican crowdfunding platform that allowed him to continue to crowdfund when GoFundMe shut theirs down because they gave the excuse of them being Christians. And again, they were a white couple. And then you have this so-called Republican black woman that freedom talking about bringing diversity, which again, this whole idea of blacks being Republican and the idea that they're conservative, that too, just like the Texas rep, is pretty much a myth. I mean, because it's too rare that you find a legit so-called black conservative. All the black conservatives who are genuinely that way living in America, you could fit them all in one medium-sized apartment. That's how many there are. Every other black, whether they call themselves Democrat, which most do, or Republican, or independent, or libertarian, they're all part of the monolith, no matter what they label themselves as, which is victimhood ideology and aligning themselves with criminals like this. Now, again, as I stated before, it should have been a wake up call back in 2020 with BLM and George Floyd and how Negroes shamelessly advocated for that piece of trash. And then the Daniel Penny situation and the Kyle Rittenhouse situation. But it still seems to not be a wake up call for a lot of so called white folks who just refuse to accept that, yes, black people are going to hate them no matter what. No matter how much you pander, make concessions, try to blame, well, rap, maybe it's the rap that's doing it, or the single mom households, which, this Carmelo Anthony pretty much showed you another example that's full of crap. He had a two-parent household, and he still gave way into wanting to be a thug, as you've seen in various photos that, of course, the liberal media won't post. And then when stuff like this happens, usually the Negro doesn't have to be afraid of any sort of lynch mob. In fact, they usually get off or get lightly punished. I mean, there's a few stories that I've highlighted in this video where you can see, the fat black woman that stabbed the white boy, 3-year old, to death. She was labeled as not fit for trial. And again, whites didn't erupt over that. Elijah DeWitt, he was killed by two Negro girls on his father's birthday, and the white cup apologized, like Austin Metcalf's father pretty much did. And then Ethan Lemon was killed and beat to death by being beat to death outside of good old LeBron James' school. And they were found not guilty of one of the major charges that would have gave them a hefty time behind bars. And again, no eruption over that. And I'm going to go out on not much of a limb. I'm just going to say, state the obvious, Austin Metcalf, his killer, will get little to no time, if any time at all. And guess what the reaction is going to be? Nothing. Nothing. Because even the so-called white folks that are fed up with this nonsense, they're still too scared to do anything about it. And again, I'm not trying to insinuate or push any type of violence, but at the very least, you think you will utilize your capital in your communities to, at the very least, financially penalize, the various agents that have enabled this injustice to go on. And it's a twofold injustice. It's the injustice of making it seem like so-called white people are out here hunting and harassing black folks. And then the second injustice is Negroes are the ones actually doing it, but they still get to claim to be victims. Now, why does the situations like this have any interest to somebody that's non-white? Well, these low impulse control Negroes are a danger to the black people that are around them as well. Even though they get sort of an extra uh, bit of excitement about the thought of killing somebody white and then taking advantage of that opportunity when it's brought upon them, they still primarily terrorize other so-called blacks, which is why black people in general are infinitely retarded for always wanting to defend low impulse control Negroes because they are a danger to them as well. But so many black people, too many black people, most black people in this country are so much more interested in this idea of pissing off white folks and hating white folks that they don't even think about protecting themselves from the very same predators who maybe in this instance attacks and kills somebody white, but in most instances they're attacking and killing someone so-called black. And so again, to answer my own question, it's pretty simple. No, they're not aware that a race war it's happening and it's been happening, but it's really about trying to wipe out Western culture and Western civilization. And the best way to encourage that is by just labeling it as white. Because POCs, minorities, so called minorities, in particular so called black people, they just get great enjoyment in hating white people. And if you don't believe me, you must be in a coma, willfully ignorant, or you could just simply look up any panel of all black people on that panel live streaming on YouTube or Twitter spaces engaging in conversation. And you can see the regular, and it's just like casual conversation of the regular vitriolic hate that black people share about whites. And so it's no shock or surprise at all that Negroes are coming to this guy's defense, including the judge. And again, these black judges make it publicly known they're going to be doing their rulings based on favoritism towards so-called black criminals. Now, if this was like a child support case and it involved a black male having to pay child support, that would be because the gender war within the community. That would be an instance where she would go against the black man. But the fact that he kills somebody, and especially kills somebody white, of course, she's going to seek uh, setting him free. After a bunch of libtards, and they're not just black ones, raise the money on that so-called Christian platform, ran by white folks, I might add, that also call themselves Republican. You know, but again, I don't know how many instances like needs to happen before people start being bold enough to not care to acknowledge that this segregation thing that happened once upon a time. In fact, it wasn't a bad idea, especially since black people claim how badly they want away from white people when we know that's not the case. But the fact that they publicly claim it, then that's what they should receive. The ones that's demanding it so much. And the white liberals that want to be bleeding hearts and white saviors, they should be forced to live around those Negroes and other minorities and and exist as a white minority amongst a bunch of POCs. But as we know, liberal whites are terrible people, and they'll virtue signal to kingdom come while quietly ensuring they live in a majority white area.